Number 9. Ford LTD. The Ford LTD was the full-size Ford that American families chose when they wanted the most car that the Ford nameplate offered at a price below the Lincoln Continental. In 1973, Ford sold the LTD in 6-passenger sedan and station wagon configurations, with V8 engines displacing 351, 400, and 429 cubic inches. Configurations the decade's previous fuel economy standards had never required Ford to apologize for. The LTD delivered 12 to 14 miles per gallon in real-world driving conditions that American buyers had never needed to calculate because American gasoline had never cost enough to make the calculation matter. October 1973 made the calculation matter. The LTD owner who pulled into a gas station in November 1973 and found the pumps dry was holding a car whose 20-gallon tank disappeared in roughly a week and a half of ordinary use. The odd-even rationing that several states introduced, license plate last digit determining your fill-up day, placed the LTD on a schedule the previous generation of American buyers had never imagined needing. Number 8. Chrysler New Yorker. The 1973 Chrysler New Yorker was the largest, most fuel-consuming production car that Chrysler manufactured, a C-body full-size sedan with a standard 440 cubic inch V8 producing 215 horsepower through a TorqueFlite automatic and delivering, in the fuel economy conditions that American families actually drove, approximately 10 miles per gallon. At 10 miles per gallon and the pre-crisis gasoline prices of 38 cents, the math had never been worth running. At 10 miles per gallon and the fuel shortages that arrived in November 1973, the New Yorker became the most visible symbol in every American neighborhood of a calculation that had been wrong for decades and simply had not mattered until the moment it suddenly did. The New Yorker's velour interior, its Power Everything options list, its formal vinyl roof, and its Continental kit communicated the specific aspiration that its buyers had played for. The car that said something about its owner to every neighbor on the block. What October 1973 changed was what it said. Number 7. Chevrolet Impala. The Chevrolet Impala was the most purchased car in America for most of the previous decade. By 1973, it had become the default automobile of the American family, the car in more driveways, more factory lots, and more school pickup lines than any other single model. Its 350 and 400 cubic inch V8 options delivered 14 to 16 miles per gallon in the driving conditions that American families used. Before October 1973, that number had appeared in no purchasing decision. After October 1973, it appeared in every one. The Impala owner who sat in the gas line in November 1973, a line that in some cities stretched 4 and 5 blocks, beginning before dawn, with station owners turning customers away when the tank ran dry, was sitting in the car that more Americans owned than any other. The gas crisis did not end the Impala. It continued to sell, and it continued to lead American sales by 1977. But October 1973 imposed a cost on every Impala owner that no sticker price had mentioned, the cost of the Tuesday morning when you reached the pump and the pump was empty.
Number 6. Chevrolet Vega. The Vega was General Motors' answer to the Volkswagen Beetle and the Toyota Corolla, the domestic compact that the company had rushed to market in 30 months to claim the fuel-efficient small car segment before foreign manufacturers could establish it permanently. In October 1973, the Vega was positioned at exactly the right coordinate: small displacement, lightweight, domestic dealer network, accessible price. The crisis that made every Impala and LTD owner look for an alternative made the Vega, on paper, the correct answer. The problem was that the Vega's aluminum cylinder block was already failing. Head gaskets were blowing, cylinder bores were warping. The car that General Motors had positioned as its compact solution to the imports was accumulating service records that contradicted the reliability argument it needed to make at precisely the moment it needed to make it. Number 5. Ford Pinto. The Ford Pinto had been on the market since 1971, and by October 1973, it had accumulated the sales record of the domestic compact positioned correctly for the oil crisis even before the crisis existed. Its 2.0-liter four-cylinder returned fuel economy that the Impala and LTD could not approach. Its price, below $2,500 in base specification, made it accessible to the buyer who had never previously considered a compact. When the gas lines formed in November 1973, the Pinto was the domestic subcompact that American buyers who could not find a Beetle or a Corolla could still buy at their local Ford dealer. The internal Ford cost-benefit analysis that would define the Pinto's legal history had been prepared. Its conclusions were in Ford's files. But in October 1973, none of that was public record, and the American buyer who needed fuel economy and needed it from a domestic source needed the Pinto. Number 4. Dodge Dart. The Dodge Dart had been making the case for the Slant 6 engine since 1963. 10 years of American ownership had produced a documented durability and fuel economy record that the crisis of October 1973 did not create. It confirmed. The Dart's 225 cubic inch Slant 6 returned between 22 and 26 miles per gallon in ordinary driving conditions. Its documented longevity record, accumulated through a decade of owner feedback from taxi companies, commercial fleets, and private buyers who drove them to 200,000 miles without internal engine rebuilds, gave it reliability credentials that no domestic compact of equivalent age had matched. The Dart owner who pulled into the gas station in November 1973 needed fewer gallons to fill a smaller tank and needed to return to that gas station less frequently than the driver of every full-size American car in the line ahead of them. That arithmetic, 25 miles per gallon against 12, twice the interval between visits to a pump that might or might not have fuel, was not a new calculation. It was the same one that Dart had been making for a decade. October 1973 made every American do it at once.
Number 3. Ford Maverick. Ford had launched the Maverick in 1970 with one number on every advertisement, $1,995. The case for the Maverick had always been economic, the domestic compact at the domestic price from the domestic dealer. By 1973, the Maverick's base inline 6 returned fuel economy that the full-size American car could not approach, and its price remained below what any Japanese import could match at a Ford dealer. When October 1973 arrived, and American buyers who had been driving Galaxies and LTDs started calculating what a tank of gas was going to cost them on a Tuesday when the pump might be empty by Thursday, the Maverick was the car in the Ford showroom that answered the question before it was finished being asked. Total North American Maverick production through its 7-year run would reach approximately 2.1 million units. The 1973 model year represented the compact's commercial peak, the year when the crisis made its argument not just persuasive, but urgent. The Maverick is at number 3 because the car that Ford had built for the buyer who needed transportation at the lowest price found in October 1973 that it had also built the car for the buyer who needed transportation at the lowest fuel cost, and that those two buyers in the fall of 1973 had become the same person. Number 2. Toyota Corolla. Detroit had been dismissing the Toyota Corolla as a curiosity since it arrived in the American market in 1968. Small, underpowered by domestic standards, built by a manufacturer with no American dealer history, the Corolla had grown its American presence through a mechanism that automotive advertising could not replicate. Existing owners telling prospective owners what the car was actually like. The owner who had bought one in 1969 and driven it to 1973 without the repair events that comparable domestic compacts had generated was the Corolla's most effective salesman and had never been on Toyota's payroll. October 1973 converted a preference into a stampede.
American buyers who had ignored the Corolla for 5 years formed lines at Toyota dealers that mirrored the lines at gas stations. Dealers who had moved modest volumes reported waiting lists for the first time. The car that Detroit had spent 5 years calling a curiosity was, in November 1973, the car that every American who stood in a gas line wished they were driving instead. Number 1. Volkswagen Beetle. For 20 years, American journalists, automotive executives, and ordinary buyers had found the Volkswagen Beetle amusing. It was small, where American cars were large, air-cooled, where American cars were water-cooled, rear-engined, where American cars put everything in the front, its heater was inadequate for Midwest winters, its trunk was in the front, it had no conventional trunk at all in the conventional sense. For 20 years, the American response had been a version of the same question. Who would choose this when American cars existed? October 1973 answered the question. The Beetle returned 30 miles per gallon from an air-cooled engine with no coolant, no water pump, no radiator to fail. Its 11-gallon tank at 30 miles per gallon stretched far enough between fill-ups that the odd-even rationing was a manageable inconvenience rather than a crisis. The American buyer in a November 1973 gas line was looking at the car ahead of them and calculating what the previous 20 years had cost them. The Beetle is at number 1 because the car America had been laughing at since 1950 was right the entire time. And it took an oil embargo and lines around the block at gas stations from Long Island to Los Angeles to confirm what 20 years of ownership data had already proven.